What occurs when the foundation of a family starts to crumble, when love vows, equality, and spiritual bonding start to lose their grip? Can a marriage endure the emotional silence that slowly seeps in? When bias spoils fairness and trust starts to break, what's left to keep a family intact? If you've been watching the Brown family on Sister Wives, then you already have the answer to some of these questions. Cody Brown, the self-assured patriarch of a plural union at one time, thought he could balance out 4 wives. What he didn't anticipate was the toll on his emotions that came from seeking to make all 4 of them happy. His emotional absence became more apparent, and the oneness that previously characterized the Brown family started to break down. It wasn't one man failing to bond, it was about the emotional space he created by picking one wife over the others and the harm that ensued. We watched Cody's relationships with his wives, Meri, Christine, Janelle, and Robin, transform from deep love and shared faith to hurt, distance, and growing resentment. So, what happens when the emotional wounds run so deep that even long-standing bonds can't survive? In this video, we're exploring how Cody's emotional detachment and increasing favoritism toward Robin set off a chain reaction that fractured the Brown family. We'll look into the personal battles each wife faced, how they coped with the emotional breakdown of their marriage, and the steps they each took toward finding peace in the chaos. Cody's emotional neglect wasn't a sudden shift, it was gradual, like a slow leak that eventually drowned the entire structure. For years he claimed to be fair and present for all his wives, but his actions told a different story. As his commitment to Robin grew, so did his with Meri, Christine, and Janelle suffer. The notion that he was merely spread too thin became untenable. This was a pattern, a conscious prioritization of one wife while the rest became background people in their own households. Meri, being with Cody the longest, was hit the hardest. Once at the center of his world, she was emotionally disconnected. The intimacy, the attention, the company, they were all lost. She was left not only alone, but emotionally weighed down by a relationship that no longer provided her with what she required. We witnessed her shut down over time, emotionally exhausted, and left guessing what became of the man she once believed in. Robin's arrival into the family was an unmistakable change. She wasn't merely the new wife, she became the preferred one immediately. Cody's energy, his passion, and his attention were directed to her. The disparity was apparent. Gatherings within the family served to make it even more evident. Cody hovered around Robin, and the others were left to look after themselves. The emotional rift increased, and with that, the resentment. She arrived. Christine had always been a true believer in the plural family way of life. She loved the sisterhood and the shared commitment. But Cody's increasing distance drove her to the edge. When Christine decided to leave Cody, it wasn't just a personal choice. It sent shock waves through the family. For Meri, it felt like betrayal. Christine wasn't only walking away from Cody, she was leaving the foundation they had all built together. That moment drove a wedge between them and exposed how fragile the bonds among the wives had become. The camaraderie among the wives had begun to disintegrate well before Christine left. What had been a strained act a moment ago was now a performance that felt forced. They weren't competing for Cody's attention anymore. They were fighting to keep their own emotional selves intact within a framework that no longer allowed it. Robin's increasing friendship with Cody made the rift even deeper. The emotional connection she had with him made the other wives feel even more isolated, creating a silent war of emotional survival in the family. Polygamy, in theory, guarantees harmony and support, but in practice for the Browns, it meant emotional exhaustion, skew, and pain. Each wife struggled to compete for Cody's attention, but no one ever quite succeeded. Christine, who had invested her heart in the family for years, finally hit the breaking point where she couldn't keep acting. She realized she was giving and getting nothing in return. It wasn't about jealousy, it was about feeling erased. She knew she couldn't remain in a relationship where she felt emotionally invisible. Janelle had her own unspoken struggles, a known independent. She didn't usually speak up. But even she couldn't help but notice the distance increasing. Cody had ceased to appear for her in a significant manner. She experienced the pulling away just as the others did. Perhaps she expressed it less, but the effect was the same. The more Cody concentrated on Robin, the more Janelle was treated like an afterthought. The emotional distance grew until it could no longer be denied. Meri, however, was still attempting to keep everything intact. She held on to the hope that things would somehow be better someday. But she knew better. Cody wasn't returning. Not in his head, not in his soul. And her bond with the other wives had also frayed. The sisterhood that had previously been the source of her support now felt hollow. She wasn't only wounded by Cody, she was wounded by the loss of the common connection with the women she once thought were life partners. Ultimately, Meri realized, in order to guard her own heart, she needed to step back. It wasn't easy for her. Not after all those years of trying to remain loyal, faithful, and hopeful. But keeping on giving herself to a family where she felt utterly alone was no longer a choice. Her own emotional health had to take priority. This wasn't the tale of a single man and his 4 wives. This was the disintegration of a family that was once founded on common belief and trust. Cody's emotional abandonment, his inability or refusal to remain equally attached to each of his wives, resulted in the gradual but inevitable downfall of what was intended to be a cohesive family. And ultimately, each wife was left to pick up the pieces from the emotional rubble he had left for them. What is a family to do when the very foundation of its existence is eroding? When love vows, equality, and spiritual bond gradually lose their power, can a marriage withstand the emotional silence that infiltrates it? When favoritism supplants fairness and trust starts to disintegrate, what remains to keep a family together? If you're a fan of the Brown family's experience on Sister Wives, then you've already discovered the solution to some of these questions. Cody Brown, the former self-assured patriarch of a plural marriage, thought he could have balance with 4 wives, but what he didn't know was the emotional cost involved in keeping everyone pleased. His emotional absence was more apparent, and the oneness that once characterized the Brown family started to disintegrate. It wasn't one man who couldn't relate. It was about the emotional space he created by favoring one wife over the rest, and how it caused harm. We watched Cody's relationships with his wives, Meri, Christine, Janelle, and Robin, transform from deep love and shared faith to hurt, distance, and growing resentment. So, what happens when the emotional wounds run so deep that even long-standing bonds can't survive? In this video, we're exploring how Cody's emotional detachment and increasing favoritism toward Robin set off a chain reaction that fractured the Brown family. We'll look into the personal battles each wife faced, how they coped with the emotional breakdown of their marriage, and the steps they each took toward finding peace in the chaos. Cody's emotional neglect wasn't a sudden shift, it was gradual, like a slow leak that eventually drowned the entire structure. For years he claimed to be fair and present for all his wives, but his actions told a different story. As his relationship with Robin grew stronger, his relationship with Meri, Christine, and Janelle weakened. It no longer seemed plausible that he was merely spread too thin. This was a pattern, a conscious prioritization of one wife while the others became background characters in their own households. Meri, who had been with Cody the longest, felt the sting particularly sharply. Once at the very center of his life, she was suddenly emotionally severed. The closeness, the focus, the company, they were all lost. She was left not only alone, but emotionally weighed down by a relationship that no longer provided for her what she required. We watched her retreat over the years, drained emotionally and left questioning what became of the man she used to trust. And the emotional distance didn't remain isolated at her relationship with Cody. It started to appear between her and a few of the other wives. In doing that, Meri was finally standing up for her own emotional requirements. She knew that she would lose herself completely in a marriage and family, no longer serving her if she did not. Christine's decision to depart was arguably the most surprising and life-changing of all. For years, she had held on to the concept of family, to the oaths she had sworn, and the promises of spiritual enrichment that polygamy had offered her. But the experience was nothing near as she dreamed. The emotional abandonment she suffered at the hands of Cody, coupled with the increased cracks in the family, left her emotionally and physically insecure. As hard as she had worked to try to make it work, she knew that remaining in the marriage would only continue to damage her. She needed to take care of her mind and heart, even if it meant cancelling out the vows she had made. It wasn't about walking away from her family, it was about taking care of herself. For Christine, leaving was a matter of self-preservation. The choice to leave, though painful, was the most obvious method for her to take back control of her life and her well-being. The conflict between the religious principles of the family and the brutal reality they encountered grew impossible to disregard as time passed. Plural marriage, as demanded by their religion, was designed to create oneness, emotional satisfaction, and spiritual maturity. The theory was that both wives were to be upheld by Cody, emotionally and spiritually, and in doing so be bound in a sisterhood, trust, and faith. But as we all witnessed on television, that was anything but the truth of what went down in the Brown household. The inability of Cody to fill the role of both emotional and spiritual leader was a key part of the family disintegrating. Instead of promoting the idea of equality, unity, and balance, Cody's favoritism towards Robin produced an emotional divide. He increasingly became emotionally unavailable to his first 3 wives, forcing them to struggle on their own in a relationship that was supposed to be based on mutual faith and commitment. His failure to keep his vows to the wives left them not only doubting their marriage, but also questioning their faith. What had originally been a pillar of religious ideals now stood threatened by his failure to deliver. In so many ways, Cody was a metaphor for how breaking down the emotional needs of those around you can destroy all that you hold dear. Christine's change after she broke with Cody was nothing less than empowering. For years, she'd given her heart to a relationship that left her feeling emotionally abandoned. But when she finally made the hard choice to leave the polygamous family, something miraculous ensued. She started to rediscover herself, no longer burdened with the emotional drain of trying to please Cody or keeping up with the family competition. Christine was at peace in her own life. She was finally free to live for herself, prioritize her children, and work on her mental and emotional well-being. She talked candidly about how she had spent years feeling inferior and how leaving empowered her to be herself again, something she had almost lost in the suffocating atmosphere of the plural marriage. In her own words, she confessed how much of her identity had become intertwined with the thought of being a good wife, and how leaving Cody provided her an opportunity to once again feel like herself. For Christine, the most astonishing discovery was how much she had disconnected from her own needs. Once she left the marriage, she was able to own her selfness and independence. The burden was off, and she could now live life outside the toxic orbit. Her self-relationship was the anchor of her healing, demonstrating that walking away was a failure but an empowering act of self-love. For Janelle and Meri, their transformation was slower to come, but no less profound. Meri specifically had been stuck for years in a pattern of emotional abandonment. Her catfishing scandal failure was the wake-up call that caused her to question everything: her marriage, her own self-worth, and the negative patterns that she had been tolerating. Although she did not leave right away, the emotional space she started to create from Cody and her sister wives indicated a pivotal change. She started to prioritize herself, something she hadn't done in decades. Her social media updates began to show more of a strong, confident version of herself. She was no longer the forgotten wife behind closed doors. She was taking back her power in front of the public. Janelle, however, had a more subtle yet efficacious method of self-protection. She also felt stung by Cody's abandonment, but she handled it differently. While Cody retreated into his own emotional space, Janelle discovered how to establish boundaries for herself and seize ownership of her story. She spoke up more and more about how she struggled and her path towards self-discovery. It's evident now that Janelle, like Meri and Christine, was on the outside of the marriage. While her path might have been slower, her transformation was real, whether by contributing more to family conversations or taking more for herself. Janelle gained a sense of independence she didn't know she had. These three women, Christine, Meri, and Janelle, together represented what it was to reclaim individual autonomy. They realized they had to take care of themselves in order to become healthy, happy, and whole. They were no longer sister wives. They were individual people with their own names, their own aspirations, and their own existence beyond Cody. Christine, Meri, and Janelle Brown dedicated themselves to a system of unity, faith, and sisterhood for years. However, as time went on, the emotional foundation started to unravel, not due to the institution of plural marriage itself, but because of Cody Brown's increasing emotional distance. Christine was the first to leap. After all those years of feeling invisible and emotionally abandoned, she knew remaining would just keep harming her well-being. Her choice wasn't spontaneous, it was about survival. In choosing herself, she freed herself from a cycle that had muted her voice. She reclaimed her autonomy, put her children first, and started healing herself. Leaving wasn't failure, it was self-love. Meri's process took longer. The catfishing scandal years back was an eye-opener for her, making her look at the toxic behaviors she had become accustomed to. Cody's abandonment left her feeling invisible, and gradually she emotionally distanced, not only from him but from the role she had been playing for far too long. Her change became public through her social media. A woman retaking her power, her identity, and her self-worth. Janelle's journey was subtle, but just as strong. Cody's emotional unavailability was costly, but she fought back with boundary setting and self-reflection. She started speaking up more, sharing her personal growth journey. Her independence came gradually but surely, demonstrating that healing does not have to be boisterous to be authentic. Cody's emotional removal didn't occur overnight. Initially, it was subtle, the shortening of conversations, more time spent with Robin, less interaction with everyone else. But eventually, he ceased appearing emotionally. He was no longer the husband, the leader, or the partner his wives required. His lack of attention became the quiet strand that unraveled the whole family fabric. And although the family started out on a shared spiritual foundation, what they really required was communication, emotional presence, and respect, all things Cody ceased to provide. The Brown women showed that leaving something that doesn't work for you isn't weakness, it's strength. They were no longer sister wives, they were individuals who reasserted their voices, their peace, and their power. What are your thoughts? Was the family's fate sealed by Cody's emotional neglect? Were the wives justified in choosing themselves? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another in-depth video from Sister Wives Underground. Until next time.